Well, good afternoon, everybody. As you can see, we have JJ and Joel with us from USAA. We want to thank you all for joining us virtually today for the second session of ideas to kind of keep us all financially well during this pandemic. This is a new workshop that JJ has worked on, so we appreciate the opportunity to partner with him and bring this to you. I do want to let everybody know that following this session today, this is a recorded session, we will email this out to you along with the first session that we hosted last week. There's a lot of really great tips and tricks in there, and so much information that I think you'll appreciate getting that slide deck to review again later on. So today, as I mentioned, we are joined by JJ and Joel Vargas, who are here with us to talk through some of the stuff that they're seeing with the pandemic and finances and what we should and shouldn't do. They are with the Military Affairs Division of USAA, so we truly appreciate their time and their expertise, and we welcome them into our homes today. And with that being said, JJ, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Brooke. Thanks to you and to Lincoln Military Housing for letting us join you. We're happy to be here, and crazy times. So I guess with the crazy times, we also have some opportunities that pop up. So this is something new, and Joel and I are really excited to be here. Hopefully you can see my Army hat in the background there, but I originally from Kansas City, went to West Point, spent about 6 years on active duty. When I got off of active duty, I went into financial planning. And about 8 years into that, I found USA. I'd been a USA member for a long time before, and met a financial planner at a conference. And 6 months later, I was down here in San Antonio, and then have been there since, working with members. And right now I'm on the military advocacy team here at USAA. And Joel and I are part of the military affairs team. And again, in this new world, getting the opportunity to go out and see our members and prospective members in a different way, but we're excited to be here with you. Thank you for taking your valuable time out to spend a little bit of time with us. And I'm going to let Joel introduce himself, but one thing I want you to think about and maybe share with us in the chat, it would be what would you like us to discuss? What would you like to get out of this? What topics are important to you? If you were with us last week, Joel covered a whole bunch of information on financial basics, so we'll give you a little bit of a recap of some of that stuff, but were there questions that came up from that, or were there just different areas that you wanted us to look at? So let me turn it over to Joel, let him introduce himself, then we'll get to it.
All right, JJ, thanks very much. Again, to Brooke and the team there, I just want to echo the same sentiments as JJ there. It's an awesome partnership, the ability to be able to do this and take advantage of the chance to talk to folks and provide some training right in their own backyards where they're comfortable, and kind of try to get some tips and hopefully some pointers here that will help them. I grew up in Bronx, New York, big Puerto Rican family. If you had money, it was a good thing. If you had food on the table, you better eat it all, because mom wouldn't be too happy. We didn't know where the next meal is going to be. I started as a young E1 in the Navy, worked my way up the ranks to Chief Petty Officer, Warrant Officer, and then Navy LDO. I retired just over 30 years as a lieutenant commander out of the Admiral staff there. Did aviation maintenance the entire time. So I kind of have lived the life of those that have struggled and those that have went up the ranks, right? So I broke that paradigm of not really having any foresight. And quite frankly, I didn't start till I was a Chief Petty Officer to actually start putting money away and doing something with my life. It's paid off. I'm doing pretty good now, thankfully. But it took a hard struggle up the ropes. Had I learned that earlier on and maybe had that advice, had those tips, because quite frankly, back then it wasn't something that was at the forefront, right? They didn't teach us that early in the military. But we're finding that out now that people are doing it a whole lot more. With that said, understand that we know what it's like to have to start and kind of get to where you are today. But if you have any questions at all, just put them out there. Let us try to answer them for you. Let's have some discussion. JJ is going to open up. There are some topics that are going to infuse discussion. So take advantage of those opportunities to talk. And, if we can't answer them here, we certainly will get that answer for you and get it back to you via Brooke or the team there. And again, an exciting opportunity to do this. We look forward to some good discussion. And again, thanks everybody for kind of chiming in, coming into this and doing this with us.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Joel. So again, why are we here? Well, we're here because the world has got turned on its head. And if you look at from a financial perspective, as a financial planner, I look at it and typically try to say, well, what has happened in the past that I can kind of build my response to what's happening today. And frankly, there's nothing that's really happened like this before, at least not in our lifetimes, because we saw the Great Recession, really the collapse and the attempt, or ultimately the ability to get the financial network, the financial industry back on its feet. But that was really all about a real estate boom and bust and mismanagement on the financial side. This is totally different in that it's essentially a demand-based crisis, and it's a demand-based crisis because we're trying to deal with this pandemic, and it's resulted in huge numbers from an unemployment stance, the biggest rise in unemployment that we've seen since the Bureau of Labor and Statistics started tracking unemployment. Stock market that went from a bull market to a bear market as quick as it's ever happened. So there's a lot of uncertainty out there and a lot of concern. And that's why I asked you up front if there were some specific areas, specific things, topics that you wanted to talk about. So as Joel said, if you've got questions, put them out there. But I think our prevailing message is that things are going to get better. And do we have a crystal ball? Can we tell you that it's going to be a V-shaped recovery, that the markets are not overstepping right now? Because the markets have really bounced back significantly since the lows, but markets are a forward or a leading indicator. So are the markets anticipating good where we're not quite there yet, or not? I mean, there's some sense of normalcy, because if you're from Texas, you recognize this cup, the Whataburger cup. So my wife and daughter were out and grabbed some lunch there, and I got a Diet Dr. Pepper. So we're seeing some things come back to normal, but there's still obviously a long way to go. And so we're interested in what your experience has been and what your questions are. But in the end, really the message here is that you've got to continue to drive on, and things are going to get better. Whether it's in a few months or it takes a little bit longer, things are going to get better. So let's go to the first slide, Brooke. And I think this is all about what you saw last week, or if you haven't seen it, you need to go back and look at what Joel talked about last week. But I think as I look at life, or the lessons that I've instilled in my kids, if one of them, I hope, sticks with them, it's the idea of where they focus their energy and efforts. And so I was at right after I got out of the Army, I was at a meeting for the financial planning company, the financial services company that I was with. And the guy that headed up the sales organization was talking about how you should expend your energy, how you expend your efforts. And the way he framed it has stuck with me for a quarter of a century. But he said, essentially, you've got 3 buckets in life. The first bucket are the things that you can control. The second bucket are things that you can influence. And the third bucket are things that you cannot either influence or control. And his thought was, hey, you ought to really focus the majority of your energy and efforts right there on the first bucket. And again, that's really stuck with me over time. And it's been something that as I said, I've tried to share with my kids and get them to focus on and how they look at life. But I think that relative to the pandemic is an important lesson to focus on. And so my number one point in terms of financial wellness during the pandemic is just the idea of focusing on the fundamentals. So managing cash flow, anybody have, when I say managing cash flow, that's kind of a financial planner way of saying what? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Maybe not. Well, essentially I'm talking about budgeting, right? So when you look at Americans and trends out there, the 2019 Schwab Modern Wealth Survey, good survey, gives you a sense of what people are doing or not doing. 60% reported living paycheck to paycheck. And I don't know if that's your experience, but clearly if you're living paycheck to paycheck and you have some sort of income disruption, or you need to go stock up on groceries or toilet paper, as it were, it's going to be a challenge. And so one of the things that we've seen is that this is an opportunity, because we're all basically at home, to take a close look at where are there opportunities for us to cut back or cut out? Where are there opportunities for us to find savings, find a way to save and invest where maybe previously we didn't? And I don't know what your experience has been, but I'd be interested in hearing it in terms of how you've been affected from a income and expense standpoint by the COVID-19 crisis. But I've had several meetings where members and folks that have joined us have basically said, hey, we feel really blessed because from an income standpoint, it hasn't at this point had that big of an impact on us. But I would be surprised, unless you're really hitting Amazon hard, if it hasn't had a positive impact in terms of spending. I look at our own household, we are spending significantly less eating out or obviously on any sort of entertainment. And so when I look at the bank account on a regular basis, I say, wow, with some adjustments post-pandemic, maybe there are opportunities for us to be able to save and invest more. And that might be your situation as well. But the golden rule of personal finance, of course, is spend less than you earn. And that starts with getting a tight handle on what's coming in and what's going out. Does that make sense? Joel, any thoughts on that? I know you talked about it last week.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. We talk about specifically to the pandemic. It has just like you, it had made me to a new risen to a new level of awareness now as to what I've been spending money on, and it's given me really a new strategy on things to kind of put some more money maybe towards my 401k or other things that are going to work for me for the future. But there are some goods and bads, right? But I take this as a silver lining in the cloud because it has been an opportunity to reevaluate how I spend my money.
Yeah, exactly. And so again, going back to the fundamentals, save and invest. Joel talked about last week, there is a difference between saving and investing, saving being primarily short-term, saving for short-term goals. And I would define that as something that's less than 2 years out. And so if I was to build a framework, and it's a simplified framework, but a framework to build your savings and investment plan around, it would have, I'm back to 3 buckets again. It would have 3 buckets. The first bucket being short term, and I would call that anything within the next 2 years. The middle term would be anything between now and retirement, which would be the third bucket. And so if you look at how you save and invest in terms of meeting goals and objectives that fit in those 3 buckets, it can kind of define how you and how much you should be allocating towards those different goals. But the key thing is to have a program where you're doing that and doing it really in a deliberate manner. So if I've got, so I'll tell you how we at our house, we don't really do a lot of budgeting, but I would call it goals first budgeting, or kind of a pay yourself first type of approach. So we have 4 different savings accounts. One savings account is called the house fund. And I was telling Brooke before we started that we actually bought a house a few years ago. And so we had set up an account to put money into to be ready to close and be ready to buy the blinds and do all the stuff that it comes with home buying. But once we got into the house, we realized, holy cow, I mean, we're spending a lot of money on whether it's all the stuff that we need to do, we need to repair, and those sorts of things. So we continue to put money in this house fund. But it's a savings account, and it's called House Fund. We nicknamed it House Fund. We also have a Vegas fund. Won't talk a lot about that, but we put money in that fund each pay period. We used to save for money for our kids' college. My baby is actually getting ready this fall to start her senior year, so we're not doing that anymore. But of course, we save in both of our 401ks at work for retirement. So everything has a name and a purpose, and that's another way to do it. If you fund all your goals up front, and then at the end of the month, you're not carrying any credit forward, or you're not carrying any debt forward, then you're probably in pretty good shape. But when you look across the board in terms of having a financial plan, Fidelity came out with a survey last fall, and according to their numbers, 18% of Americans have a written financial plan. And that's, again, I'm biased as a financial planner, but that's certainly not a very good number. And there ought to be a lot more folks out there with a financial plan, but maybe it doesn't need to be a 100-page written plan engineered by a financial planner. It could be just having a clear vision of what your short, medium, and long-term goals are, and then taking the actions necessary to make those goals a reality. So we talk a lot about financial wellness, financial capability, but to me, there's two elements to that. One is knowing what you need to do, and two is actually taking action. And so that's, I think this is a great time, if nothing else, for you to firm up what your game plan is and what you're trying to accomplish from a financial perspective. Because again, if I ask you, hey, what's your number? What does that mean to you? Well, it could mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, but from a retirement planning perspective, it ought to be, hey, here's what I need to accumulate in terms of my nest egg to be able to supplement military retirement, to be able to supplement Social Security or other fixed income or guaranteed income sources I have to make my retirement vision a reality. And again, it's one of those things where people let it happen to them instead of making it happen. So if nothing else, we focus on bucket one, the things we can control. And these are all examples of things to some extent that you have control of, despite what's happening and all the craziness going on around you.
JJ, we do have one question from an anonymous, and I like it because it talks about something we discussed last week during our brief. But the question is, can you speak to savings using a CD as your main vehicle? We just sold our house and not comfortable putting that money into stocks.
Yeah. Sure. So I think that's a great question. And I think, again, if you go kind of back to my 3-bucket example, I think that it's critical for people to be aligned. And by that, I mean, you're putting money in a place that's appropriate for the reason you're putting it away. So if you just sold the house, maybe the plan with that money is to buy another house 5 years from now. Or maybe it's to do something 1 year from now. Or maybe it's money to supplement your retirement 40 years from now. And I think, to me, that would drive how I would approach using that, or where I would place that money. So a CD, the risk with a CD, if you're setting aside the money for a long-term goal, is inflation. So we at this point, we're not seeing a lot of inflation, but if you look at all the money that's going into bringing this economy or keeping this economy on the rails, essentially the Fed is printing a lot of money to buy bonds and to keep the financial markets and the financial system working. Well, that will tend over time to be inflationary. And even over the last 30 years, I use the example, I graduated from West Point back in 1988. And at the time, if somebody had given me $1 million and I had just dug a huge hole and put it in there and then pulled it out now, I would have, over that time period, lost 60% of my purchasing power because of inflation. And so, again, going back to your question, CD, nothing wrong with the CD as long as it aligns with what you really want for that, or want to do with that money down the road. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, they're on Q&A, so I'll wait.
Oh, okay. I think I can pull that up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So here's another thing on that same topic, because it's understandable. It's hard to get excited about the. It's hard to. I like that. Go. No task too great. It's hard to get excited about the market with all the fluctuation we've seen, and really that, like as I said earlier, that huge drop from bull market to bear market, or the fast drop. But one way to mitigate that, if you've got long-term money and maybe you're not comfortable putting it all in the market at once, what you could do with the money that you want to allocate for the long haul is say, okay, I'm going to break this up into 12 or 24 pieces, and I'm going to move a little bit each month into the market. And that way, the problem with trying to time when the market is going, when is a good time to invest in the market is really a challenge, because you've got to make two calls. You've got to make when to get out and when to get in. And so that's difficult. I've found that in my history to be a difficult thing to do. And so putting a plan into place where you're taking your long-term money and going to say, hey, over the next 12 to 24 months, it's going to be invested, gives you something to get the money moving in the right direction, but it doesn't put you out on a ledge in terms of, let's say the market, we have another huge correction here next month. You've only got 1/12 or 1/24 invested. Does that work?
We got a thanks earlier from them. I think they got it.
Okay. All right. Good to go. Okay. So again, big point here, focus on what we can control. All right, let's go to the next.
Fantastic suggestion.
Yeah, go ahead.
What they said. All right. Fantastic suggestion is the feedback you got on that.
I've got one positive there. All right. So next step 2, if you will, of being okay during this financial pandemic is the idea of checking your emotions. So I'd love for somebody to share with the group, if you're comfortable doing it, some sort of emotional financial decision you've made. Because I know we've made a few at our house, and I'm happy to share them. But most of them have to do with houses, getting enamored with a certain house. That's why I'm here. Or vehicles are a great example of where you can make an emotional decision where you get attached to a vehicle. But typically, in this particular case, we're talking about the emotions of day to day. I mean, we're in the house. You may not be able to hear it, but the TV is going on in the background there, 24/7 news. And if you listen to it and get caught up and let those headlines and all the I don't know what basically all the excitement, both good and bad, drive what you do, whether it has to do with spending decisions or going in or out of the market, as we were just talking about, it's not going to be a good thing. So emotions, I would say, are not really an ally as you make these decisions. And so how do you combat that? Well, on spending decisions or really any big decisions, maybe a way to combat that would be with what I would call a cooling off period. So there's, whether it has to do with maybe you have a fixed amount of time. We were talking about it this morning, and somebody said, hey, what we do is we always talk about it, make sure it makes sense, then move forward. But maybe you just say, okay, before we make any big decisions, we're going to sit on it for 24, 48 hours, whether that's a decision to buy something, sell something, make a big life move, leave the military, whatever it might be, as opposed to just making a knee-jerk reaction. So avoid letting emotions rule the day. And again, these days, most of the emotions that you're going to be feeling probably are not very positive. And again, that could be a real downer.
Well, we got one from Tabitha here that says, with stock so low, she upped her 401k to 20%. Then when she got her paycheck, she realized I still have bills.
Yeah. That's hey, hats off to you, Tabitha, for doing that. I mean, I think that's one of the things we have kind of a mantra here: start early, start small, stay committed. And the start small portion of that is based on just what happened to Tabitha. Is if you try to bite off too big a piece, I mean, how do we eat the elephant? One bite at a time. But if you try to bite off too big a piece, then all of a sudden you find, hey, I still have bills. And what can happen is people can just quit. And so I'd much rather see somebody start in a manageable way and be able to build on that over time. Joel and I talked about last week the idea that the military pay system is ideal for being able to build up your savings over time, because you're going to get time and service increases. You're going to get annual cost of employment increases in January. You're going to get promotions, and all those provide opportunities that you have money coming in that you didn't have the previous month. And that to me is the easiest money to ramp up what you're saving and investing. So I think.
Interesting thing I did a lot, and I'm not recommending this, however, I will tell you that it did work for me because I had to go in pretty aggressive, right? I began to live one pay grade less than I was in the military. So as a chief, I functioned like a first class pay, et cetera. Every time I got a promotion, yeah, it was a promotion, but that meant that I was still living just underneath that pay scale, as I reinvested my money and did things with it. And it seemed to work very well for me. But again, I had to do a lot of catching up compared to everybody else, right?
Yeah. And I think in my time working with military families, there's probably been maybe 5 that I can recall, 5 folks that actually retired. So they retired from the military and that was it. And because they were in financial position to do that. And the one commonality there was they had all started investing well before they met me. So that's I think, again, the start early element of start early, start small, stay committed. All right. Any other thoughts on, so Tabitha, hey, good job. Maybe ramp it down a little bit and then build it back up. But I love your sentiment there. All right. So again, put emotions aside. Don't let emotions rule the day. Let's go to the next slide, Brooke. So here, this kind of we've kind of talked to this already, but essentially there are going to be opportunities out there. And so let me talk about a few of them that might be relevant to you. And so I'm going to start with debt because that's fairly easy. But if you look at interest rates, of course, the Fed can really influence the short-term rates. Long-term rates are driven by the market, but we're seeing interest rates that have never been any lower. And so perhaps there's an opportunity to refinance a mortgage or refinance really any sort of debt. So that type of thing exists out there, again, as a byproduct of everything that's going on. On the investment side, we talked about the markets in long-term. I mean, the markets go up and down, but if you look at the long-term trends, it's been up. Certainly not without downs along the way. So if you've got the time horizon, you've got the risk tolerance, investing could make a lot of sense. From a tax perspective, there may be opportunities if you have investments outside of an IRA or a 401k where you've actually seen a loss. You haven't realized a loss, but you've seen a loss on paper. Well, maybe there's an opportunity to realize that loss by selling and moving that to another like investment, not the same investment, because then you might trigger some wash sale rules. But that's something you want to talk to your tax advisor about. But if you realize that loss can be used to offset gains, so a little bit of income. And if there's still more a loss left over, it can actually be carried forward to future years. Another opportunity from that standpoint might be what's called a Roth conversion. So last week, Joel talked about traditional IRAs and TSP, 401k, traditional pre-tax type investments, and then tax-free Roth investments. Well, when you get to retirement, having a stream or a pool of money that's available to you tax-free is a huge advantage. But the downside of that is you don't get real tax advantage today for doing it. So one technique to move money from traditional to Roth is to convert it. And the downside of that is you have to pay taxes on the taxable portion that you convert. Now, if the market is down and your value is down, obviously, if you convert it, you'd be paying less taxes. Same thing if your income is down, you'd be paying less taxes. So again, another one of those opportunities that you don't want to just jump head first into, but you might want to explore is the idea of a Roth conversion. All right, any questions on that? Okay, so let me talk about the other. Oh, I'm gonna go back one, Brooke. Sorry, that was a great transition by me. So you also want to look at new approaches. I mentioned dining out, and we have spent so much time in terms of our family together, preparing meals, talking, having a lot of fun together. So I think that's just one simple example of a change that might make its way from pandemic to post-pandemic. And so as you examine how you live your financial life, what are the opportunities that you can take advantage of that have come out of this? And again, I don't know what they are, but you're living them. You've had time to talk about them, so they could be something that really allows you to power forward with your finances. All right, Joel, any comments on that one? Brooke, we're making you work back and forth, back and forth. Brooke said she didn't want to do the slides.
I'm paying attention here. Okay.
That's right.
No, JJ, that's good. That's good stuff there. And really, it's just taking a look at how you're doing business right now and find new ways. You know, we talked about earlier in the earlier brief, there are a bunch of virtual opportunities to get training, to look at stuff. You know, I talked about the Dave Ramsey stuff that's out there right now at a lower rate, some of the webinars and stuff like that. Just, go in for a little while, get some, feed the soul a little bit, and then just keep moving. But it's a good opportunity right now at this time. You're going to find that a lot of folks out there, and I spoke specifically about Dave Ramsey. I'm not endorsing him alone. There are plenty of people out there that have great advice. But certainly everyone gives you little takeaways that you can look at. So look for those opportunities, educate yourself a little bit, and and even a couple of things that JJ provided in a link up there, I believe, at the in the chat room. You can
Right.
go to the military life stuff, go to the coronavirus stuff, take a look at all those things, and just get smart on that and find those new ways that you could help yourself.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, so I think next up we have something that's really counterintuitive to the military mindset, if you will, and that's the idea of asking for help. I I think as a financial planner, I mean, one of the amazing resources that sits out there on just about every, if not every installation is some sort of military and family readiness center, fleet and family, airman family readiness, Army Community Services. And there's certified financial planners in some cases, or financial counselors, personal financial managers out there at all these installations just waiting to help people. And too often I think it becomes a stop of last resort when there's problems, there's debts that aren't being paid, that sort of thing, as opposed to being a positive resource to make a difference. But again, what part of that has to do with just the idea that, hey, we're raised to be independent, to make our own decisions, to be self-reliant, and that doesn't lend itself to asking for help. So whether it's aid associations, local, state and federal government type programs, whether it's community organizations, Red Cross, that sort of thing. You can't be ashamed or unwilling to ask for help. And frankly, especially in the financial arena, sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And so maybe a trip to legal assistance could be helpful. And again, it takes a little bit of a mind shift to be able to do that. But the help that's out there, and really, frankly, all the folks that are willing and really wanting to help is amazing. So Joel mentioned, and I put it in the chat box, USAA's hub, usa.com/coronavirus. So that's where, if you're a USA member and want to find out what we're doing or what we're offering or how we can help you, you can certainly visit. But I think that's the case across the board, whether because of law changes, the CARES Act, or just because of the natural reaction for all of us to want to help our neighbor. You'll find that if you ask for help, you might be surprised at what you get. Joel?
So I told you, when we started this, I told you that I started as a young sailor, not having that kind of educational stuff. And I did grow up in that paradigm where asking for help was viewed as a sign of weakness in the military. I think that's changed a little bit over the years now. I think the military has done a better job. There's still moments out there, right? But I think they're doing a much better job now at opening that up to people and families to come forth and say, hey, ask for help. We're here to help you. And they're using, like Lincoln Military Housing, using a venue like this to provide training to you, family service centers, all those folks that are out there that provide that to you. Don't be afraid to use them. Please use them. That's how you're going to help yourself. So we're out of that paradigm now. Let's get to helping each other out, because this is what we're growing into. And moments like these make you realize that. So again, I took advantage of the Navy Relief. I took advantage of the Family Service Center, every opportunity I could, because I needed it. I was a young sailor with a family trying to grow up and make ends meet. Do the same for yourself.
Yeah, I remember I was a lieutenant, and clearly education-wise, they didn't tell me what I needed to know, because I had this specialist that worked for me. He had 2 kids, young guy, and there was something wrong with his car, and I was like, man, I'll help you out, and and I helped him out financially, not even knowing that the resources were out there right down the street. So again, sometimes we don't know what we don't know. I don't think I ever got paid back for that one either. That's all right. Next slide.
That's about normal.
All right. So this is a great opportunity. We talked about, hey, Joel mentioned this earlier. Number 5 for staying financially well is just to stay connected, and stay connected means, stay connected with your friends and family. Don't be isolated. Reach out to others that may be isolated. So I find myself calling my parents much more often, or at least my mom much more often than I used to, just because they're sitting in a multi-level care facility up in Kansas, and I'm concerned about them. And they literally, prudently have basically been locked down since this began and haven't been going out at all. And so I want to stay connected, make sure that they're okay. And I think I've talked to my son. So my son, I didn't tell his story earlier, but he graduated from high school, joined the Army. They sent the San Antonio kid to Alaska, and he learned to like the cold. But after his enlistment was up, he got out, and he was all excited when he got out in November. He was going to the University of Colorado. And so, of course, he got up there, and he spent this whole semester in an apartment doing virtual online learning. But I'll tell you what, I've talked to him more often in the last couple months than I had in the previous years. So staying connected is a good thing. It's also, as Joel talked about, an opportunity to learn, dip your toes into water in terms of things that you may be not familiar with, and may have an opportunity to learn. All right. We hit that one pretty hard. Let's go to the next one, Brooke. So this was, I was being smart here. Remember the king. And cash is king. And study after study just shows that we do, as financial planners, we do a great job of talking about emergency funds. As a military affairs team at USA, we do a great job of going out and talking to folks about the importance of it. Joel talked about it already today. Hey, you ought to have, this ought to be the first step. If you want to set the table in terms of investing and building for the future, well, the first step to make sure that you're not investing on day one and pulling the money out on day two is to make sure you have a backstop, and that backstop is the emergency fund or cash. There's a bank rate financial security index. They do it regularly, but each year one of the questions they ask is what would happen if you had a $1,000 unexpected expense, and the answer inevitably for about 60% of people is offensive, in that they would have to use a credit card, borrow from friends or family, or sell something. And so when we get into a time like this, where we've got unemployment spiking through the roof, millions of Americans losing their job, they're pretty financially fragile. And so this is yet another reminder. I know we had last year with the government shutdown, USA did a fantastic job supporting a Coast Guard Mutual Aid. Joel, is that? Yeah, Coast Guard Mutual Aid. Yeah. So that they could make interest-free loans to Coast Guardsmen who had their pay disruption. But we seem to have regular reminders of the importance of that emergency fund. And so let this be one that, again, post-pandemic is something that you take forward and really work on. Oftentimes people say 3 to 6 months, where did you come up with that number? Well, that's kind of a core financial planning principle, if you will, but really that number should be driven by your own circumstances. So if I was in the military, married to a non-military spouse, we were a dual income family, and we were pretty much living on that income, both of our incomes. I mean, to me, that would be a significant indicator that we ought to have a robust emergency fund, because if I get PCS'd and my job is geographically based, or my spouse's job is geographically based, and we have an income disruption, what are we going to do? If we've got expense structures set up here and we have income that's all of a sudden dropped down here, what's going to fill the gap? Well, the emergency fund is. Favorite story is a guy named Pete at USAA, retired out of the Air Force at Randolph Air Force Base. He wanted to work at USA. That it was his primary focus when he transitioned out of the military, but it took him 12 months to be able to do that. Now, he was lucky enough to have military retirement, but he talks about the fact that, hey, he spent the last 3 or 4 years while he was in the military building up that transition, what he called transition fund or emergency fund, so that when he made the leap to civilian life, he was able not to take the first job. He didn't have to take the first job to put food on the table. He could wait for that opportunity that he eventually got at USAA. So again, point is cash is critical. And going back to my buckets, first bucket, emergency fund and expenses that you anticipate within the first couple of years. And so if you're looking for things to do, I mean, especially during this tumultuous time, I think if I had the money, going back to the question we had earlier about a home sale, well, because of the time we're in, the idea of putting it in a CD or putting it in a savings account until things get on a smoother plane, there's some real validity to that. All right, let's finish up with the last point. And again, I think we've hit this one pretty good, but it's just the idea of being open to learning. And if financial planning was rocket science, I wouldn't be doing it. I had trouble with all my engineering courses, but so it's not that complex. There are principles like diversification, like watching expenses, like some of the things we talked about today, not letting your emotions rule, and having a game plan in place that provides you a framework for moving forward. And so doing those sorts of things, if it's not something that you're familiar with, hey, this is a great time while you have some time to expand your portfolio, if you will. So that's what we would encourage you to do. So that's kind of in a nutshell, the 7 steps for financial wellness during the pandemic. The biggest thing is, again, is that in the end, we're going to make it through that. I always say that the military community is flexible, tough. They're going to kick it, whatever it is, in the tail. And I think the same for the country and really the world. We're going to get through this and get to a better place. And what you want to do is position yourself to move and be in position to do good things when we are through this. So stay on the rails. Joel?
Yeah, I mean, just going back to what JJ talked about with the emergency fund earlier, you know, we talked about it last week as well. It's tough to start out with 3 to 6 months. It really is for most folks. So not a bad idea just to get that little bit of money. And he referenced that earlier when he talked about, you know, you get those allowances every year, you get the pay raise, you get the, you know, the bonuses or whatever stuff comes up. Just take a little chunk of that and build it up slowly in a small interest savings account. Start out with $1,000, and typically with $1,000, you're normally in a good place, right? Because if you're a deployable family, in most cases, when your husband or your wife deploys or your significant other deploys, something inevitably will happen, and we know that happens all the time. So at least have that $1,000 in there to start, and then when those opportunities come up, when the uniform allowance, and you don't use it all on your uniforms, throw the rest into that account and build it up. So that you'll get to that 3 to 6 months. Maybe a little bit more based on your circumstances or what situation you're in. And now you have that security. And I can tell you with my situation, I go to sleep with a smile and I wake up with a smile because I know I have that fallback. And especially when you're investing, you want to have that emergency fund because depending on the level of aggressiveness you go in, the risk levels, you want to have something to fall back on if the market crashes, right? So kind of keep that in perspective as well.
On that topic, because that's a great point. What did everyone do with their recovery rebate check? If anything, if you got a recovery rebate check, was there anything? Anybody have any good stories in terms of what you're able to use that money for? I think this morning we had a new living room set, TV, and saving a part of it.
Yeah, he actually said most of it, which is good.
Yeah. All right. So at this point, we're ready to address any questions you have. We'll stick around as long as you'd like. And if you've got those questions, if you don't have those questions, we'll sneak back and do some more work or something similar to work. Right, Joel?
Yes, sir. An anonymous attendee wrote they purchased a Kaiser stationary bike to stay fit.
Hey, so I actually last, and Joel knows this, but in December I had an aneurysm in my aorta and a bad valve. So I had a open heart surgery in December, thankfully, before all this all broke out. But it really drove home for me. As a financial planner, there's 2 things that are probably top of everyone's list. One is health, and the other is finances. To me, that along with this pandemic really drives home the primacy of health and then finances. But they're both very important, obviously.
Absolutely. Looking for more questions.
So while we're waiting for a couple more questions to come in, just a reminder, if you missed us at the beginning of the call, we will be sending out a recording of today's call along with a recording from last week's call. There's just a ton of great information and we want to make sure everybody has access to it. So keep an eye out on your email tomorrow for that. And we also have some additional resources that USAA has provided that we'll make sure everybody gets. So feel free to share those as well. And I think we have one more question that has come in for you guys.
Now, James is asking, is whole life, this is good because we talked about this last week, is whole life insurance a good investment?
Yeah. So I should never answer a question. Yeah, that'll be on tape. So essentially when you look at insurance, there's two primary types of life insurance. One would be term or temporary insurance. The other one would be permanent insurance. So permanent insurance would be whole life, variable life, universal life. Those are kind of the names associated with different types of permanent coverage. And to me, the critical thing when it comes to insurance is to, again, back to that term I've used several times today, alignment, is to align the type of insurance with the reason or the protection purpose of that insurance. So as I look at, for example, my life, well, I had expenses that would have been associated with education for my kids. So now they're almost all educated and that need is gone. I've got a mortgage. That mortgage is eventually over a term of years going to be paid off. I have other debts that are going to be paid off. I have the need to support my family relative to retirement. Well, at the same time, I'm building a nest egg, so that need is going to shrink over time and hopefully go away. And on the other hand, let's say I had a special needs child that was going to need insurance. I was going to need life insurance for the benefit of that child forever, or I had estate planning goals that I wanted to fund with life insurance. Those are more permanent in terms of how long that need is going to last. And so there, I think looking at a permanent type policy would make more sense. Another example would be survivor benefit plan. Essentially permanent coverage. So if I was going to replace that, I'd likely look at a permanent type policy. So I'd hesitate to call insurance an investment, but there's a critical place in all of our financial plans for the various types of insurance, including life insurance. And again, as far as life insurance goes, to me, aligning the coverage with the purpose is the key step to take there. Does that answer that, James?
Yes, thank you. Question from Willie. What is a good tool for budgeting? We talked about this again, another stuff we talked about last time, but it's good to talk about again.
Yeah, so I think that's really preference. Like if you're old school, I don't know about Joel, but me, I like a journal that I carry with me. You can use your notepad in your phone for the purpose of catching all those expenses that just kind of happen. But there's Mint.com, USA has a money manager tool. There's YNAB, you need a budget is an app that I've heard a lot of people talk about favorably. So there are all sorts of tools and technology that you can use to help facilitate the process. To me, it's more about doing it than not doing it. When I typically would sit down with a member and one of the first questions I'd ask them is, well, how much money do you have left at the end of each month that we could use for financial good, whether that was paying down debt, saving, investing. And so they tell me, $500 a month. And then I'd say, okay, go home and track your expenses for 60 days, come back, and we'll go on to this next step. And of course, when they would come back, head down, shuffling in, it wasn't $500 that they had to do all those good things. It was $53, because just the act of tracking your expenses, kind of like weight loss, the act of tracking your calories will positively influence what happens in terms of your spending. So I think to me, again, more about doing it as opposed to the way you do it, but there are certainly a lot of tech apps that can help you there. Joel, I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and Willie, I will offer to you that, you may be doing this already, but if you're not, as you start budgeting and using those tools, find one that's pretty intuitive, right? Because some of them maybe a little bit, you have to navigate through a little bit, but find one that's pretty intuitive to you. JJ just mentioned we have one. There are other ones out there that are great too, but make sure it's something that is easily usable for you, because you want to keep that interest going. Right? That's one. And he mentioned about starting off with those 60, 90, come back in 60, 90 days. That's a great thing to do. We use the acronym SMART, right? Make it attainable, make sure it's a measurable thing. So if you look at the acronym SMART, and I think Brooke has that information she can share with you all too, but when you use that acronym and take a look, you set those goals small at first and make them achievable, see the success. And as you get accustomed to success with those budgets, then you make it bigger and you set it out a little bit further. But I mean, most cases they'll recommend start with 60, go to 90 days, go to 6 months, and then build it out for a year. And then something like wanting to purchase a car, right? Maybe you want a down payment. You say, okay, I got to pay $1,200. I want to pay $1,200, at the end of the year. So you set your goal for $100 a month. At the end of the year, you have $1,200 accumulated, and your budget was in place, and you made that goal for yourself. Maybe it's more. Whatever the case is, $2,400. Then obviously it's going to be $200 a month. But make those goals for yourself attainable ones at first, and get in that habit of success, and then build on it. Okay.
Yeah, and I think the other important thing about that is being squared up with your spouse or significant other. You got to be both. We used to have a CEO at USA, and every time he got up, he put up this picture of a rowboat and the importance of everybody rowing in the same direction. And really when it comes to finances and managing your money, whether it's the goals you set or the budget you have, spending, expenses, whatever it is, it's critical to be paddling in the same direction.
Absolutely. Can I answer your question? Oh, yeah, thank you. Okay. Anybody else? Oh, okay. Raymond says, hey, what are your recommendations on 529 plan?
Yeah.
Thoughts?
So, yeah, I got to stop that. That's my after action list. But in this particular case, saying yeah to a 529 plan is that's good. When you look at a 529 college savings plan, it's a tax advantage way to save for college. So the advantage that when I say tax advantage, the advantage is now in some states, depending on the plan, you'll get a tax deduction or some sort of tax benefit, sometimes a tax credit for using the 529 plan from that state. And so that would be one of the things that you'd want to look at is the state that I pay taxes in, is there some sort of advantage I get for using that 529 plan? But the real cool thing about the 529 plan is if you start saving in the 529 plan, you're not going to pay any taxes on the money as it grows, on the income, the dividends, the capital gains. And if you use it for qualified education expenses, then the money that you pull out comes out tax-free. So that's a huge advantage that again, is something to take advantage of. I think the neatest story I heard is I ran into a couple, and they were expecting, but they didn't have a child yet. So they had set up a 529 college savings plan in the wife's name, as she was the beneficiary, to get a jump start on college costs. Because when you look at 4-year in-state tuition, excluding any use of the post 9/11 GI Bill or transferability, but you're talking about $20,000+ a year to cover that. So the earlier you start saving, back to what we were talking about with compounding returns, the better off you're going to be. And so they had started a 529 plan, and then when the baby was born, they were going to change the beneficiary to the baby, which is, again, a cool thing. So great resource to look at all the plans from all the different states is savingforcollege.com. So you can check that out if you want to compare different plans in terms of expenses, investment options, and that sort of thing. But on the whole, the 529 college savings plan is probably the primary college savings vehicle out there. And I'm again, going back to what we've said multiple times, hey, I love the idea of saving for college. We don't have a I'm saving too much problem. We've got $1.7 trillion of student loan debt out there. So every dollar you save is a dollar that on the back end is not going to be student loan debt that either you or your child carries out of college with.
And this may give Raymond a little bit of information as well. But Tabitha just asked, what if you have a 529 plan and your child does not go to college?
So again, cool thing about a 529 plan is you can transfer it among your extended family. So you can change the beneficiary if it's not a custodial 529 plan. So you could change it to another child or a relative. Ultimately, if you don't use it for college, it's money you could use. And so what would happen if you used it in a non-qualified withdrawal, you would have to pay tax on the income portion, or the earnings portion of that withdrawal. And then you get hit with a 10% penalty. So that's not good, but it's not it's not bad. It's not like you're putting the money somewhere and you would never be able to touch it. And again, that would only that taxes and penalty element would only apply to the earnings portion of the 529. So you wouldn't be double taxed on the money that you initially put into the plan. Does that make sense, Tabitha?
Let's see here. Yes, good to go. And then Stephanie is asking, how safe are money market funds versus a money market savings for long-term emergency savings? That's a nice question.
Yeah. So, Stephanie, so so a money market account would be a bank deposit program. So that would be covered by the FDIC. So I would put that at this level of safety, pretty darn safe. Whereas a money market fund is a pretty safe vehicle, but it's a market vehicle. And so one of the things we've seen, I didn't really talk about a lot about all the stuff that's gone on to support the markets and support the economy, but one of the things that's been happening is the Fed is making sure that those money market funds stay stable. But there have been times in the past where money market funds have lost value. Typically, you'll see the value at $1, but there have been times in the past where that's fluctuated. So from a level of safety, yeah, it's a pretty safe vehicle, but and historically, not today because interest rates are so low, but historically, money market funds have paid really competitive interest rates. But from a safety standpoint, a money market account, a bank deposit product would be a safer option, Stephanie. And that's something that, again, you want to shop. The divergence of savings accounts or money market accounts across various institutions can be pretty significant. And if it's going to be your long-term holding fund, one of the things we didn't talk about really, but is the idea of isolating or your emergency fund. So if you have it sitting in, let's say you bank with Bank A, and you've got all your accounts there, it's pretty easy to go on your phone and just tap and slide the money over. That's what I was talking about earlier with the idea of, hey, earmarking the funds. Because if I've got a nickname on there, I know, hey, that's my daughter's graduation account. I don't want to move that into my regular spending account. But one of the ways that you can put a little bit of a firewall between your emergency fund and everything else is to have it in a separate institution where you have to maybe do an extra step to access that. And so that may play into the shopping for rates. Is that good, Stephanie? Or average?
We'll see. Yeah, I don't see any more questions right now, I think.
Okay.
What else? Maybe so safe for. Oh, she went, yes, how much in terms of percentage should I have saved at any time? That's.
So on a percentage basis, as a percentage of your gross income, is that? Yeah. So if we're talking about, it kind of depends when we catch you. So if you're 22 years old, 24-year-old, just starting out, for retirement, we would say you ought to be saving at least 10%. But again, you're going to ramp that up over time, as we talked about earlier. But if you're catching me, if you're talking to me and I haven't saved a thing, telling me to save 10% is better than nothing, but it's not going to get me where I need to go. So a lot of it depends on where you're at in life. But I think as a start point, we would say 10% for retirement, that third bucket, and 5% for the short-term type stuff. So 15%. As far as what you put in your emergency fund, I would not look at that as a percentage. I would look at that as a month of core expenses. So if you spend $2,000 a month on the basic expenses to keep the wheels turning, then that's where we come up with that $6,000 to $12,000, 3 to 6 months of expenses. Did we get that one, Stephanie? I'm not sure I understood the question.
Yes, thank you. Good to go.
Okay. Well, good. If we don't have any more questions, again, on behalf of all 35,000 of our employees here at USAA, we want to thank you for for all you do. And we're excited. Again, thanks, Brooke, for giving us the opportunity to come out and spend a few minutes with the folks, and hope we can do it again and on a variety of different topics.
Absolutely. We appreciated having you in our homes today, and we think this information is great. So we're thankful that everybody was able to join us, and we will be getting that information out via email to everybody tomorrow. So thank you. Stay safe.
Awesome. Thank you. Everyone take
Take
care.
care.